Welcome to Roundtable News. I'm Jeff Glover. So let's talk about the UFC Fight Pass Invitational. It's a big event coming up. They've done several already. They've done some pretty big matches. The whole card is pretty stacked. I took a picture here of the matches. Let's go through them. Nick Rodriguez versus Mason Fowler, and that says absolute. So they're not going to weigh in. So they're just fighting each other at whatever weight they're at. And I love that. Wow, that's great. I don't think there's enough matches like that. Not having to worry about making a certain weight before a match is pretty cool. The next match is Renato Moicano versus Christian Guzman at 170. The next match is Kaynan Duarte versus Luke Griffith, and that's at absolute as well. That should be a good match. Both those guys are really good. The next match is Giancarlo Bodini versus Gabriel Arges. And of course, Giancarlo is current world champion at his weight class in ADCC. And Gabriel Arges, I know, is a world champion in the gi. They're fighting at 200 pounds. Renato Canuto versus Aaron Wilson at 170. As well as Raquel Canuto, which is Renato's wife. They're both on the same card. That's awesome. She's fighting Allison O'Connell, and they are fighting at 145. We also have Jay Rodriguez versus Jonatas Gracie. That's going to be a good match. We have Peter Frank versus Rafael Domingos. Both those guys are really good. You have Oliver Taza versus Pedro Rocha. Both guys are really good. They're fighting at 195. Wow, that's pretty heavy. I didn't know Oliver Taza was that big. And the last match here is Helena Krivar versus Arielle Laverne. Now, I'll tell you what I think, my initial thoughts on all those matches. The only person who's expected to win on that card is Helena Krivar. She's the only person who's really, if she lost, it would be a big deal. All the other matches could go either way, if I'm being honest. And I wouldn't be blown away. If Mason Fowler beat Nick Rodriguez, I wouldn't be blown away by that. Mason Fowler's amazing, right? And Nick Rodriguez loses sometimes. He's lost. Helena Krivar never loses, dude. You know what I'm saying? And she wins every match by submission. If you ask me, this whole card, all the matches on this card, they're great. All these dudes are great, but these matches could go either way, which is cool. That's cool. I'm just saying, my point that I'm trying to make is that Helena Krivar is the only person that if she lost, we would all be surprised. Every other card, like I said, could go both ways. Every other match on the card could go both ways. I'll talk about Jay Rodriguez versus Jonatas Gracie. That's going to be a great matchup. Both these dudes are super strong and fast and athletic and young and skilled and experienced. If I had to pick on that one, I would go with Jacob Rodriguez, because I think he has a little more Abu Dhabi experience. I know he's won the trials before. Jonatas Gracie has won almost everything he's done himself, so that's a good match. Giancarlo Bodini versus Gabriel Arges. I'm gonna give that to Giancarlo. It's spelled one way and then you say it a different way. Giancarlo. I'm gonna give that one to Giancarlo. Of course, being the ADCC world champ. It's pretty expected. However, if Gabriel won, wouldn't be too crazy. I've seen Giancarlo lose before too, Yeah. Duarte versus Griffin. That's a tough one. Um, Griffin has a lot more like momentum behind, like fire underneath him right now. Um, Duarte Kynan is kind of, the older, experienced guy in this match, I would say. So who would I choose? I don't know. That's a tough match, dude. That's definitely a match that could go either way. Um, so yeah, that's called the UFC Fight Pass Invitational. If you're not watching that, you should be. The next segment, a couple of questions from a white belt. Super fights. I thought this was hilarious. When you first get into jiu-jitsu, you hear about super fights. And you're like, super fights. Why is it called a super fight? There's fights, there's matches, there's UFC, there's all this, there's kickboxing, and then somebody tells you there's a super fight. And you're like, well, what is a super fight? And then you start hearing it all over the place. When I was coming up in jiu-jitsu, super fights would happen like once a year, and it would be at like the biggest tournament in the world, and then it started doing like tournaments would have two black belts that never like fought each other would like do a super fight. They would stop the amateur matches and bring out this Brazilian dude and this Brazilian dude, and they would have their match, and that was a super fight. But that's back. That was see things were so different then. That's when there was like when tournaments were what it was all about. Okay, now we have like professional events like the PGF, um, like the Fight Pass Invitational, like what else is there? There's Who's Number One. Okay, there's all these events that host super fights. Each one of these matches are super fights. These are all champions um, fighting each other, and it must sound funny to a white belt who's first coming into jiu-jitsu, and you hear about a super fight, and then you see the super fight, and it's like two purple belts are having a super fight, and you're like, what? you know. But yeah, a super fight is that it's just two guys or two fighters that have some usually this is what it used to be, okay? And this is kind of how I always see it. It's two fighters that have for whatever reason not met each other at a tournament yet. And it's like, yo, those dudes it would be cool if we saw those guys meet up in a tournament. It's never happened. It'd be like, well, why don't we just like let them fight each other without a tournament? You know what I'm saying? And yeah, oftentimes super fights aren't that super. Sometimes they're boring. Another question from a white belt: buys in tournaments. Well, in tournaments that'll happen. You'll have. I remember one time I did, and I was an alternate for Abu Dhabi actually, in case of that, in case that happened, which it didn't. But I had an alternate match with the guy named Russ Mira, and Russ. This was a pretty big match for me, to be honest with you. It's probably one of my biggest victories at the time too. Um, Russ Russ was beating jujitsu guys. Like Russ was beating guys, jujitsu guys who were good in the gi that were like, okay, we're gonna do this no gi tournament, and Russ would like heel hook all these dudes, right? Who were like so used to fighting in the gi, didn't have the heel hook experience. And Russ Mira like heel hooked a lot of these dudes and made it look easy, and it was pretty intimidating. He was pretty jacked for like a whatever 145 pounder. He looked bigger than he was, but he wasn't that big. He was only 145. Um, and we had a match at ADCC for the alternate spot, and I ended up beating him with an omoplata sweep. And I'm pretty sure I was like the first guy to ever beat him. He had an amazing record. Like I remember he beat like Sim Go. He beat like all the Cobra Kai guys. He beat my friend Cade. Like there was a lot of dudes that were losing to Russ Mira. And I remember after beating him, a lot of the jiu-jitsu guys were like, "Oh man, Jeff, thank you for beating him. We're so glad you beat him." Like if you didn't beat him, he would have beat officially all the jiu-jitsu guys. And yeah, Russ went on and did great things. Um, but yeah, I fought for that alternate match because if somebody was to get hurt in the 145-pound division and couldn't make it, they'd be like, "Oh, well, we have our alternate," and then I would step in and do that. So that happens. That happens so often that like guys getting hurt, like sign up for a tournament, and then the day of the tournament doesn't show up because whatever, he got hurt last night, and now he's not here, and this dude doesn't have a match first round, so he gets a bye. And I don't know. I always hated when that would happen. I was always like, man, now I'm going to feel like I won less if I win the whole thing. I'll be like, man, if I got a bye in the first round and won the whole thing, I would kind of feel like a bitch. I'll be honest with you. So I don't know if I ever liked when that happened to me. I know it did happen to me a few times where like tournament promoters liked me. You know, and they're like, oh, Jeff, you know, you're so much more exciting than all these other guys. There's a bye in the bracket. We're going to give it to you first round, you know, because we want to see you in the finals because we like you. There's definitely bias that happens in tournaments. It's human nature. People can't help it. So that happens, you know. Oftentimes people will get into arguments about like who should have the bye. You know what I'm saying? Like there's schools of thought to this. Should the champion get the bye? You know what I'm saying? Or should like the guy who's new get the bye? Depends who you ask. I don't know. I never liked when it was given to me. It always made me feel like my victories were not as important after that. Like I was fresh, and the guy I was fighting the next round was not fresh. The guy I was fighting already had a match and was tired from it, you know. Gym fight stories. Gym fights. This is another question from a white belt here. Well, I'm trying to think of one. I don't really remember too many gym fights. I know with Frangia, he was very like neutralizing. You know, nobody wanted to get in a fight around him out of respect. So I don't know that too many fights ever happened at Paragon. I know when I was at Cobra Kai, that was definitely a more volatile place. It was an MMA gym with a jiu-jitsu program. So there was fighters in and out of there, MMA dudes all the time. I was always cool with all these dudes. I don't remember ever having a problem with anybody. But I mean, I've seen dudes like flip out. I remember a buddy of mine, his name is Sean Spangler, and he got submitted by somebody that he didn't like getting submitted by, and he was like, fuck, and he slammed the mat and like, and he walked out, and we were all like, oh man, oh Sean. And then like a minute later, he came back in, and he was like, listen, everybody, I apologize. Like, he's like, I'm really sorry, and we all started laughing our balls off because he just came in like so honest. He's like, I'm sorry, I hate losing to that dude. You guys know this. And we were all like laughing, and he was still kind of serious, but the honesty was hilarious, you know. And he's like, I hate losing to that dude. I gotta keep my cool. I apologize. And we kept rolling, and that was pretty funny to just be honest about that. You know, just come back in and be like, listen, everybody, you guys know what's his name. We all hate him. I hate him the most. I'm just honest about it. What about the flooding that's going on in Brazil? That's pretty unfortunate. I know a lot of the jiu-jitsu guys that I follow from Brazil have all set up donations, ways to send donations to Brazil to help out with people who have had their whole communities flooded away. It looks like, obviously, I wouldn't know firsthand. I'm just watching on the internet, but it looks pretty bad. And, you know, things happen horrible all over the world every day, right? It's like you'll drive yourself crazy if you're constantly worried about stuff like that. But I'll tell you what, I have a lot of friends in Brazil. Brazil's Brazilian culture and Brazilian jiu-jitsu is a big part of who I am. So, you know, I identify with the Brazilians, and when I see all my Brazilian friends all hurting because family members in Brazil have lost houses and stuff, I feel bad, and I want to offer love and respect to all the people in Brazil suffering from the flooding. That's horrible. Horrible. Yeah, so you know what's been trending, and it's crazy, is the power slap. The power slapping thing. Dana White has put a lot of attention into this recently. It's been trending. A lot of my friends like it. Our producers like it. Everybody seems to be talking about it. I'll tell you how I feel about it. It's the opposite of jiu-jitsu, right? It's like stand there and take as much pain as you can. That's like that's what I've learned not to do in jiu-jitsu. So it's interesting, you know. I don't know if I would ever do it. I don't know, maybe I would. Who do I want to smack? Who do I want to slap? Let's see. I don't want any of those people to slap me back though. That would suck. Yeah. I don't know. The power slap is pretty cool. It's like is there like technique to that? Is there form? You know what I'm saying? Or is it just to get really big and load up and swing? You know what I'm saying? That's why I think it's like the opposite of jujitsu. Like, I don't think you actually need technique. I don't know. Somebody might come correct me, but to me, it looks like the trick is to just get really big, really chubby. You know what I'm saying? Have big fat hands, and just put some chalk on that shit. You know, they chalk it up, spit on it, and lean back. And with that, you know, I don't know. Jiu-Jitsu history, and I wanted to talk about Jean-Jacques Machado today because Jean-Jacques Machado is one of my favorite old school jiu-jitsu masters. Um, I remember him from. I really remember the idea of like butterfly hook sweeping with underhooks and overhooks, and I remember really like getting the concept from him and seeing him in competition use it. And I'm a big visual learner. I don't know about you guys, but I remember seeing him be really good at that and being able to like put it into my game, or like maybe when somebody else would explain it to me, I was able to understand it better because I had seen Jean Jacques use it. And yeah, you know, he did a lot of work for submission for no gi jiu-jitsu early. He was one of the first guys to host. In California, there was like Joe Morera and there was Jean-Jacques Machado were hosting tournaments at the time. And we're talking like 1999. And yeah, he hosted one of the first no-gi tournaments, and I remember like I won a plaque. It was more than a medal. He was really cool. He was doing cool things, you know. I remember one of his first events. They like added the rule. They were like, okay, we're not allowed to grab onto shirts. I think there was one event. They did one tournament where you could like pull on the person's shirt and shorts, and it just went horribly, and they had to like instantly outlaw that shit. Um, yeah, what else is he famous for? He has four brothers. I think there's five of them. He's one of five brothers. Um, and they're all badass black belts. And their story is amazing. They were so pivotal in um, getting jujitsu across in America, just as pivotal as the Gracies. Um, yeah, I wrote down his attacks that I really like. The arm bars. Jean Jacques Machado does amazing arm bars. He does this backstep arm bar that I never really thought of till I saw it on his Instagram. Um, he's really good at spinning over the head arm bars, those backstep arm bars, the reverse arm lock. He's always been really good at that stuff. Um, Famously, he lost a match to Dean Lister at ADCC in 2005 when John Jock stepped in for, I believe it was Ricardo Arona was supposed to have the match. I could be wrong. I forget. Somebody was supposed to have the match with Dean and had to pull out, and the Sheik asked if Jean Jacques would do it because Jean Jacques had been a champion in the past. And Jean Jacques stepped up to fight a much younger, bigger, and even you could say a more experienced Dean Lister. Lost the match, and Dean Lister obviously became who he was. He was already the man at the time too. It was such a great match. It was such a good clash of a young and an old champion, and that was a big. It was interesting to see Jean Jacques lose. I don't think I had ever seen him lose at that point. I think that was the first time I seen that, and it's interesting. It's very important to see. That's a big part of jiu-jitsu is losing and seeing champions lose. Seeing older champions lose to up and coming champions. I think that's a big part of what's so cool about jiu-jitsu. is you see these great champions, put it on the line, come out and be willing to be humbled and to put over the next generation, if you will. Um, he was a coach on PGF. He's responsible for Eddie Bravo. He's the grandfather to 10th Planet System, if you will. Um, and he's an old school guy that I always respect, and I always keep up with him and everything he does and follow his Instagram and copy his moves and teach his moves and try to use his moves when I'm rolling. And he definitely deserves our respect. In the comment section, somebody was talking about side mount versus the mount position in north south and what I thought about that. I'll tell you what, getting to side mount can be pretty hard. You're right. If you watch Roger Gracie compete, his whole thing was to get on top of you in half guard and then pass to the mount. He wouldn't really like go to side mount. I don't know that I could be wrong, but I don't know if there's too many submissions of him like attacking from side mount. He would mount dudes and cross choke them, or they would like end up having to turn their back and he would take their back and choke them. So there's a lot of people that don't even like side mount. That's true. My coach, I don't think Frangia really liked side mount. I remember when he was first teaching me to guard pass, he wanted me to always go directly to the mount from half guard, just like Roger does, just like Gordon Ryan does. All the best guys do this. Yeah, you're supposed to pass to the mount. It's my generation. I remember the guys in my generation. We all wanted to knee slice into side mount. I think it was you could just get faster results and get into side mount there. And then whatever, I've developed quite a few submissions that I use from side mount. I personally love side mount. I think one of the reasons people don't like side mount is because you can get bridged over. You can get swept over pretty easily. And, you're not really like controlling the person's hips. You're not sitting square on top of their hips. Their hips, they can twist and they can barrel roll left. They can barrel roll right. There's a lot of like bumping they can do. But I don't know how much side mount do you see in MMA? How much guard passing do you see in UFC? I don't know that you see it too much. I think you see striking from the guard, guys trying to just punch the dude from the guard and the guy in the guard trying to get back up. I mean, that's because everybody knows jiu-jitsu now. Back in the day when Hoist was doing UFC 1, 2, 3, and 4, they didn't understand the triangles. Guys didn't understand these submissions they were getting caught in. He was surprising dudes and catching them with things they'd never seen before. So nowadays, most of the UFC guys, most of the guys that make it into the UFC, they're black belts in jiu-jitsu, right? These guys aren't going to walk into triangles and omoplatas anymore. So that makes them dangerous from the guard. That makes their striking dangerous from the guard because they're not exposing themselves to submissions like people who don't know jiu-jitsu would do. And that's one of the things jiu-jitsu capitalizes off is, fighters that, or people, somebody attacking you that doesn't understand the submissions you're about to put on them, or they don't understand how to pass guard, and they just will walk into your triangle. And, to an untrained fighter, that makes you superhero. That makes you Superman. You can just pull guard. That'll cause you to just pull guard on somebody, because they don't know what's going on after that. But in the UFC, the average high-level MMA fighter nowadays, that's no secret to them. Okay, they're all experts at the triangles too. But I personally love side mount. I have a BJJ Fanatics video on the subject. It's like, I forget what it's called, attacking from side mount or something simple like that. But it's one of my favorite places to set up triangles, gi chokes, guillotines. One of my favorite ideas or things I like to do in side mount is allow dudes to have underhooks and get into that battle with them, make them fight for the underhook, make them want to have the underhook back, and then give it to them so I can set certain things up off of it. Yeah, I love side mount. I don't know. What about you guys? What do you guys think? Do you like side mount? Do you feel like you lose position all the time? Do guys just recover their guard on you? Are you getting buggy choked? Let me know in the comments. Let's talk about some of the bigger jiu-jitsu schools right now. I wrote down a few names. I wrote down Atos. I wrote down New Wave. And I wrote down Gracie Baja. Gracie Baja is always going to be around, aren't they? 10th Planet, obviously. Paragon Jiu-Jitsu, which is the school I come from. And one of the reasons I mentioned Paragon is because Frangia, my jiu-jitsu coach, one of his students, her name is Tabitha Ricci, and she's currently fighting in the UFC. And she just won her UFC fight the other day. So congratulations, Tabitha. And congratulations to Frangia and Paragon and all her coaches and training partners. She's doing great. And I'm really proud of Frangia and all the work he's put in with her. And that's like, my jiu-jitsu master. So they're doing great. And he has jiu-jitsu schools in Arizona and Central California and Ventura and Texas. And he's done a great job spreading jiu-jitsu in his way. And, he's been a really good businessman and has taken his business and spread it out and opened satellite schools. And it's very impressive. And I think what he's done in the last 25 years, the word paragon is a model of excellency, a model of excellence. You could say Frangia is a model of excellence. He lives up to his name. Pedigo Jiu-Jitsu, Daisy Fresh, that team, those guys are amazing. They're one of the best up-and-coming. I mean, they're not up-and-coming anymore. They're established. They've had so many champions and so many weight classes at North American trials and who's number one and so many other events. The guy's name is Heath, and yeah, they're a great team. They had the Daisy Fresh, which was cool to watch. You can go back on YouTube and watch all their Daisy Fresh episodes, where they opened up a jiu-jitsu school in an old laundromat that was called Daisy Fresh. And it's just a really sweet story of a bunch of dudes that just like jiu-jitsu, you know what I'm saying, and wanting to open up a school and be all about jiu-jitsu and document it and laugh and have a good time and go do tournaments. And if you're a jiu-jitsu dork like I am, you find stuff like that cool. So yeah, those are some of the teams I wrote down. Atos, of course, Andre Gaval, and they've been running things in tournaments for so long and have so many ADCC and world champions every year, like year after year. Something they're doing in their program is it's working. I've gone and trained there a few times, and dude, there's just so many people on the mats. It's just crazy. I've only done like 2 or 3 classes there, and every time there's like 50 people on the mats. It was crazy. New Wave, of course. If you don't know about New Wave, that's John Danaher's team, and they're in Austin, Texas. And what can I say that hasn't been said? They're probably the best currently. Of course, because they have the top of the pyramid. They have Gordon Ryan is the number 1 guy. And yeah, until somebody beats Gordon, I think they're the best team. Yeah, those are the jiu-jitsu schools I wrote down right now. We could also talk about Victory MMA. We could talk about Surf Fight. We could talk about Black House MMA. We could talk about all the jiu-jitsu schools in Las Vegas. We could talk about so many. And I think they're all doing great things for their people and their communities. I think jiu-jitsu schools are making America great. Every city I go to, every little shopping mall you go to, there's like a jiu-jitsu school in them now, or a mixed martial arts school. And for families, jiu-jitsu schools are golden. For people that have a bunch of kids and they want to get their kids in something, They get their kids involved in the jiu-jitsu team. Wow, the kids are stoked. Mom and dad start seeing how cool it is. Oh, there's other people my age doing this. Why don't I sign up too? Wow, next thing you know, you got a whole family doing jiu-jitsu. And I've seen that time and time again. And it's probably my favorite thing about jiu-jitsu and touring and doing seminars is meeting these families that are so passionate about jiu-jitsu. And it's been such a relief for them. And it's brought their families together. And it's a way for the parents to bond with the kids. And the kids are doing better in school. And the kids aren't getting bullied. Or the kid used to be a bully and isn't anymore. And it's just all positive, all positive, all positive, all positive. This is like, what, the second episode? The first episode, we dropped it like 2 days ago or whatever, the other day. And we got so many comments and questions, and we really appreciate that. If you guys want to give us more topics to talk about, because I run out of things to talk about, please send us messages, leave it in the comments.